Good afternoon, everybody who is still here with us and still awake. Did you all get some tea and coffee and some brownies out there to keep you going for the next hour? All right. Okay, so we're going to try and have you out of here by 5. And we really do appreciate those of you who stuck around because we do have 2 short but excellent speakers here joining us to give some closing ceremonies. And then there will be a very brief few minutes from me and a very few brief minutes from our new chair for next year. So joining us here, we have John McKnight, and he is the Director of Emergency and Disaster Services for the Salvation Army in San Francisco in the Golden Gate Division. And this is an area that encompasses a third of California. He has 25 years experience combined in emergency and disaster preparedness, industrial safety, and business resiliency planning. A Navy veteran, he spent 10 years managing pharmaceutical manufacturing facilities before coming into the nonprofit sector. So I would like to welcome John McKnight.
Thank you. Thank you. I believe this works because I was talking to someone a moment ago and realized we were broadcasting. That'll be just fine.
It's up on the top. There we go.
What does success look like to you? What does it look like when you've successfully implemented a technology, either to solve a problem or to apply it after a disaster? What is that look that you receive? This question comes to me a lot because I want to know if we're going to take the energy to apply something to a community, if we're going to reach out and try to initiate a change. What's the outcome? What's our hopeful outcome, and how are we going to measure it? Now, that just sounds like a lot of metrics, but to tell you the truth, I think it has a more heartful application, and I've boiled this down to 3 simple ideas. First of all, the application of the technology, it has to be easy. Secondly, it has to be teachable, and third, it must make a difference in community. It must build community around it. As I look back on the history of the Salvation Army, I've seen a number of applications where we have made a difference in the world and where it has made a great difference in ours. And I want to use some of these historical examples to demonstrate my 3 points. I'll also talk about our modern world services and a couple agencies I had a chance to talk to just over the last week, completely kind of off the cuff, but they demonstrate, I believe, also the integrity and the meaning of real application of technologies and world services. I'm then going to stop and turn this over to you, because I want to hear from you what your stories are. And do my principles apply to some of the successes you've witnessed? When I'm all done, I'll just come together to close with a few passing thoughts. It's interesting, working for the Salvation Army, I'm a history buff. I love history. I've always loved studying it. I think it gives me a lot of perspective. And working with an organization that's over 100 years old and with a history as rich as ours, I have a lot of fodder. And of course, when I go out and give speeches, I get lost a lot in the history. But we have been in the world since 1865, and we were formed in the East End of London when a minister saw the doors of his church being closed to the poor. And that just violated the very tenets of what he believed in. So he left his church, and he left the money that it tied up to him, and he went out in the streets of East End London, and he began preaching. He knew right away. Yep. Yeah, I might. Here, play that with me. Always good to have an assistant. He knew right away that the best thing he could do was begin to serve the poor right where they were, to go out to where the people who needed your help lived. And that principle follows through with us today. One of the great strengths of the Salvation Army is that we take our ministry to where the people are. The Salvation Army is a church. It's an offshoot of the Methodist Church. But because from the very beginning we believe that the best way to help somebody was to first just provide for the basic needs, we have an extensive social services program. What you're seeing here is very early times when we offered work programs to try to get people back on their feet. We figured once they're back on their feet, then you could provide other means to help them get their lives together. We offered separate men's and women's programs for quite some time, and those still exist. The Salvation Army began its disaster services workings about 100 years ago, just after the hurricane that took off Galveston, Texas. And that now is my legacy as I take over as Disaster Service Director for Golden State Division, which, as she said, is a third of California, including the region you're in right now. So it's for those of you who are around here, it's a great privilege to be able to serve you. I'm going to give up on this here in a moment. There we go. You know, I'm going to point to you. Thank you. PowerPoint's not my strength. The Salvation Army, one of our first applications of technology that I enjoy talking about, really starts in the early years. And this is, of course, one of the legacies you're very familiar with. It was just around the turn of the century, and a local minister here in the Bay Area decided he wanted to have a holiday meal program. He's trying to feed people who didn't have any money. And a lot of these were the people working the docks. These were the longshoremen, people that worked down on the pier side. And he had absolutely no money to make a Christmas meal. So he went out and grabbed a crab pot, and he headed out to the ferry terminal in Oakland. He attached it to a chain, and he basically put a sign there that said, "Keep the pot boiling," a reference to the crab pot. I hope you recognize this. This is the kettle. This is the same kettle you will see now coming out in another month when we start lining them up outside of all the stores. The kettle began here in Bay Area. I don't know when the Bell Start came into it, but it still has that same application. And the money goes to help people in our programs. One thing about the kettle, though, that I appreciate is though it brings money into our programs, I think it also serves as a ubiquitous reminder that it's that time of year to start giving. I've had a lot of people say, I don't really know who that kettle is, but it reminded me it was time to start giving. And I like that. It doesn't necessarily have to serve us. If it serves the community, it serves a better purpose. And definitely a very simple technology. We move forward a little bit. The Salvation Army in England was faced with a very dire circumstance. In 1888, there was a revolution, would be a strong word. There was a strike. It was called the Match Girls Strike. Because back in the day, matches were made with white phosphorus, and white phosphorus is poison. It dissolves the jaw. You get the Fozzie jaw, the necrosis of the bone in here. And there was severe health considerations to this, and it was done for the very simple reason that working with white phosphorus was cheaper. So after the strike happened, the general at the time, General William Booth, decided he was going to open up his own matchstick factory using red phosphorus. He developed a manufacturing process that was not exceptionally more expensive, a little bit more, but as 1906 came around and legislation was passed in England that forbid it, there was a process in place that the rest of the companies could follow, and that was the beginning of the red matchstick companies, which eliminated all the health issues and allowed women to grow healthy and men to grow healthy because they were dying in their 30s because of this sort of thing. This was a great application of very simple technologies to help people in general. Move forward to World War I. This one's a very special favorite of mine. The general at the time, this is Catherine Booth, Evangeline Booth, is now in charge of National Salvation Army. And she heard that the boys that had gone over to France during World War I were reaching a level of despair that was affecting them. She was deeply concerned about them. They were just sitting, training in the mud at night, day after day, and they weren't moving anywhere, and she was concerned about their health. So she approached General Pershing in his office. This is not something easy to do. And she informed that she wanted to send women officers to the front lines of France to help the boys over there. And he agreed. The reason he agreed, by the way, is because when he was still Colonel Pershing here in San Francisco at the Presidio, his family was killed in a fire. And when he came back to San Francisco after his deployment, it was the Salvation Army, and it was Evangeline Booth that met him. And it was that trust that was earned in that caring that allowed her to step into that office that day and ask for this extraordinary request. Only 250 women went to France that year, and they did not stay in officers' quarters. They stayed in the trenches. They worked alongside the men, and they built a level of trust that is still resounding today in our organization. And one of the ways they did it was through donuts. Now, they originally had this vision of making apple pie, but that just didn't work, so they adapted. They found simple tools using mostly materials from artillery shells. They would use mortar shells to cut out holes. When they started, this was a helmet with lard on top of a burner in the rain, making 5 or 6 donuts. And within the year, they were producing 10,000 a day. So when the doughboys came home and told the U.S. about the donuts, they brought it home. The Salvation Army went from a little-known group to a nationally known group. And if the next time you go out and eat a donut, realize that part of the reason donuts exploded in the United States was because of the good memories they had when they were over in France, which appeals to me as a big fan of donuts. What's perhaps more important is that in terms of our ability to provide services, when following World War I, many of the countries throughout Europe had their borders closed to NGOs. They really were resistant of anybody coming in. But everybody who had been cared for by these girls, they never forgot it. And the Salvation Army was allowed to provide services in countries that otherwise would have shut their doors. These women were all handpicked by Evangeline Booth. And I got to tell you, these people had the right stuff. Absolutely extraordinary individuals. Go on, next, please. I want to move forward to a little more into the future here, our normal days. I spoke with the head of our World Services. I said, what are we doing today? I know a lot about our history. Tell me what we're doing today to help people. And he told me about a great partnership. If anybody ever shopped at the out-of-the-closet stores? Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Do you know what the name of the organization is that they fund? Neither did I until recently, and I'm not going to try to repeat it here because I just heard it briefly in a conversation. But this is a HIV treatment organization. They work worldwide, and where we were living in villages and helping people, and frankly, our people were watching these villages die. All of a sudden, AZT comes out. Now, it's a great drug. There's all these now drugs that can help, but if you know anything about HIV treatment, it has to be timed. You have to know titer counts. You have to know the physiology of the person's body to know how to provide the medicine. And this organization we partnered with provided us rapid testing equipment. So with this new partnership, we were working and being able to provide effective HIV treatment and saving the lives of people in villages. The gentleman I was working with told me a great story. He's watching now these two sons of the chief going into college. They're going to be able to come back around and help this tribe out. And their father would have died 15 years ago had it not been for not just the treatment, but the technology that came through a really meaningful partnership of this organization that was able to help us out. This last weekend, I was working up with Fleet Week, and Fleet Week in San Francisco is a lot more than ships and planes. It's a disaster services, humanitarian relief conference, week-long conference, and I had a wonderful time spending with the people from the United Nations High Commission on Refugees. This is some of their work out in the Philippines following the typhoon. And these are the standard tents that they put out there. They're nice, and they will be the first ones to tell you, thank you very much. This is 50-year-old technology. When are we going to get out of tents? Well, they worked with IKEA to develop these. And what these are prefabricated houses, if you will. They're just plastic sheets. They're not going to be a lot of insulation. They could be insulated, but they're large enough to put a family into there. They have some lighting technology. They have some power technology. This is a very basic home, but whereas the tents would only last maybe a year or two on their own and have a lot of structural issues that have to be resolved, these will last up to 5. And they can produce one of these every 4 hours. Now, right now, they're doing a lot of work with the Syrian refugees. 3 million having left the country, 2 million more having left their houses throughout there. This is overloading everybody's refugee capabilities. Here is a very simple technology that can be applied to help them out. I pulled the gentleman aside. His name was Oliver Delarue, and I asked him, what is it you need? I'm going out to a conference. Tell me what it is you're looking for. And interesting enough, he said the real challenge in any refugee status is cooking. The struggle is not so much how to cook, right? If you had fuel, it'd be great, but rarely do you have fuel, and fuel gets used for a lot of different things. But some of the technologies that exist right now affect the taste of the food so much that the people that want to have it won't eat it. So the technology they're looking for and starting to develop is induction heating, solar-powered induction heaters. Apparently, he's got a company right now that's doing some research and trying to find and design one that can be taken readily, that's robust, and will last. Of course, we've been told that it has to retain a certain amount of power in the evening. I was speaking with some people just before this conference. Wonderful, they knew all about this. And as they point out, a lot of people in Africa eat before the sun rises and eat again after. So it can't just be a direct solar. It has to be some kind of power that is retained or heat that is retained so that this continues to function off hours. Anyway, I think this might be one of them. Okay, go on. These are some of the technologies I've witnessed that make a difference. I see them, they're simple, they're repeatable, they're teachable, and they do build community. Building a community is essential because any one person can't do it alone. The communities have to come together, reinforce themselves, and more importantly, they have to instill this desire to change. The one thing to keep in mind is anytime you institute a technology, you're asking people to change. And that's difficult, especially in cultures that are very ingrained in their ways. So I know that we work with them closely to help them, to show them that it's all right. But this is where I want to stop and turn this to you. Where's an application you've seen that technology's made a difference somewhere in perhaps your outreach or in a community you've worked with? And I know someone here's got one in your hat, so I'm going to pick on a table pretty soon. Oh, yeah, you're the chair. You get to pick. Yep, and then you're going to pick on someone else because you know these people very well. Just a minute. There's some application of technology you see and make a difference in a community.
So, as many of you know, I am a disaster worker on the communications front, and so where I have seen technology make a huge difference is in Haiti after the earthquake, where we shipped down thousands of IP phones, routers, switches, and satellite uplink technology, and were able to provide a robust wireless communication infrastructure as opposed to the non-robust ones where people were bringing down a lot of little portable beacons and you were getting wireless saturation that was not functioning. So we were able to do that. And because you asked, I am going to tell you my favorite story because you didn't actually get to see my normal presentations. But after 3 months of working and being extremely exhausted, as I was listening to the radio one day, and a doctor from the BBC was talking about how there was this young girl, about a year old. They found her in the rubble. She was going to die. The U.S. government has says you're not allowed to ship anybody in from Haiti for medical care. And the doctor was talking about, we didn't care at all about that. We were going to do it anyway. And through the miracle of modern communications, we were able to arrange her transport into Florida and save her life. The miracle of modern communications was my team, even though he didn't know it. So that's my favorite story. Who wants to go next?
Thank you, John, for the excellent talk. Just a technology that I've seen. I like what you mentioned about cooking stoves. That's how I got started in global development, actually about 10 years ago. And one of the pieces of technology that I've seen change fundamentally is compressed agriculture waste, or wood pellets for that matter. And so you go into a country, and this is in particular in Vietnam, India, and South Africa, where we were working with British Petroleum at the time, which then spun off into First Energy. They have an excellent stove called Urja, 2 O's, RJA, that you can find online. And it was an excellent way to use waste materials and then bring that back into the cooking environment in a much cleaner, much more effective, much more energy efficient way. And the reason why I also wanted to mention that is because I wanted to note that the Salvation Army about 20 years ago was my very first experience volunteering. And so it was in disaster cleanup due to tornadoes in the Minnesota, where I grew up in the Midwest. So I just want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
Great.
Next couple more. He's just going to put it on the table right there in front of you. There we go. Thank you.
Where I've seen an application where technology has made a big change, and that is my experience in Africa and Cameroon and the introduction of cell phones, and how, especially the mobile payment plans, and how villagers can transfer value and money using a cell phone, and they no longer have to travel over the mountain, across the river, make a day's trek in order to borrow a couple of dollars or a few francs in order to buy seeds to plant. They can communicate with their uncle over the mountain, say, I need $2 in order to buy seeds. He can transfer it on his cell phone. They can go down to the microcredit union and pick up the $2 and go buy the seeds. And so that means that he no longer has to spend time traveling.
Good. I've got one more in me. Thank you.
Just to follow up on Catherine's story, remember the tsunami in Southeast Asia a decade ago? IEEE members formed a cell phone chain which resulted in getting the relief supplies there where they were needed, and just as important, making sure that the relief supplies who were not needed in some place were not sent there and then had to be sent back. That was done spontaneously by IEEE members because of the cell phone communication, and that was certainly an example of technology making having immense impact.
Good. You see all the hands are going up. This is nice. We've really got time for about 2 more.
Yeah.
So
These will be real quick. One, just travel. I mean, you can get anywhere in the world in a day. It's amazing. But then relationships that come from that, the bigger innovation is the worldwide network of every week I am on a video conference with people in all corners of the world. And how cool is that?
One of the major problems in our technology-oriented society worldwide is lead waste. However, I'm not going to talk about PB. About 10 years ago, yes, 10 years ago, I was working for Agilent Technologies and Hewlett-Packard. One of the operations that we had was called optoelectronics. One of the things that we ended up doing at that time was working on light-emitting diodes that were used or were going to be used in automotive applications. But of course, the automotive people wanted cheap, highly efficient, cheap, very bright, light-emitting devices. And so I was able to work on what we call then aluminum gallium arsenide. It turns out that that material is what led HP and then Agilent to work on inexpensive surface-mounted LEDs, which you'll find in a lot of automotive equipment. And strangely enough, if you open up some of these third world lamps, the 1-watt jobbies, you'll find that same technology in those inexpensive lighting for the village, one cottage at a time. So I've seen that, and I didn't realize that's what I was seeing when people were reporting that in the GHTC conference. Inexpensive lamps, illumination.
thank you. Thank you. Could you move to the next slide? This is what a typhoon looks like. I was just at this conference last week speaking to the commander, the admiral of Pacific Third Fleet, who responded to this with the full of resources of the U.S. Navy and the Marines. And he was talking about humanitarian response, humanitarian assistance disaster response, which is the military term for when they go overseas and provide services. And he had a great statement. He says, you cannot surge trust, but you can surge mistrust. And he was trying to teach the absolute value of how important it is to build relationship. And I say this now because this is the piece I want you to walk away with. Whether it's a crab pot, whether it's a donut maker, a microchip in the form of cellular communication, or any other application of technology, this is just a tool. And the greatest challenge we have in any developing country or post-disaster relief is building the trust that allows somebody to accept the help. And technologies have classically fallen down because the trust isn't infused with them. My request, my suggestion, is that if you have a vision for an application of technology, if you have an idea, partner with somebody who already has boots on the ground. We're a great organization. There are many others. I was immensely impressed with the United Nations High Commission on Refugees. fantastic group. Find somebody who has the same values as you. Work with them. Work with somebody who's already there so that they can be with the people and help them. Because truly, together, we can change the world, one person, one community at a time. Thank you.
If anyone has any questions for John.
Please.
I'm familiar with the Salvation Army through its efforts in downtown areas, trying to relieve people in destitute situations. But what other, learning now about your disaster relief efforts, broadly, what else do you do?
The three pillars of the Salvation Army. As a church, we have pastors. We have churches throughout, which could be community centers and youth programs. We have our social services programs, which is probably the most extensive, drug and alcohol rehabilitation, work programs, and the immense amount of help we can provide to communities and people who are living on the edge. And then disaster services. We have a significant component, and whereas here on the West Coast we're a little less visible, if you were to travel to places where the tornadoes and the hurricanes are common, we are an immense part of that relief. We are a relief agency worldwide, and because we live in the communities we serve, we have a great opportunity to help because we know them. In disaster first aid, disaster psychology, the first 48 to 72 hours, people want your help. And then after that, they want you out of there unless you build trust. And that's where we are very successful because they already know us. So we can get past that point where people want us to leave and then stay around long enough to really make a difference.
I've got it. We see the Salvation Army trucks, the food service trucks at different disaster sites. Can you explain what
Sure.
services they provide?
The most forward view of what the Salvation Army does in a disaster is mass feeding. That starts with water, just showing up and rolling up with a truck full of water and providing food for the people. In this last year, I have responded to the Mission Bay fire, the large apartment building that burned down out in Mission Bay in San Francisco, and I also rolled out to the Mission and 23rd Street in San Francisco when a large building burned down there. Firefighters, there are 5 alarms, firefighters are out all night, and we'll start to feed them. We'll do the same thing if people are pushed into a shelter, and we can. Red Cross doesn't necessarily do feeding, that they do is bring food in, and we're one of the options where we'll come in with a food truck. Now, that's just the forward face of it. The truth is, if I'm now in a community handing food to people and making this connection, I'll find out what they really need. And that's when I can then bring my social services programs in. Food, clothing, assistance, electrical assistance, rent assistance, whatever it is. Maybe there's people that never thought they'd need it, but today they do. And the whole point for my food services, besides providing feeding, is to get there and be in place that I can identify what's really needed. When we responded to Asiana, it was very interesting. What they needed started coming out of the woodwork days afterwards. They had nothing but the clothes in their back when they walked off the plane, and they needed luggage. They needed the clothes. Children, a lot of unaccompanied minors needed help, and because of our youth programs and people who had the means to speak various languages, we actually were entrusted to take care of a lot of the youth that were displaced while they were just waiting to contact their parents. Anyway, that was one of those great experiences where just being someplace long enough allowed us to really assist a community.
All right, I think we're kind of at time.
Yes, of course.
So
Thank you.
I want to thank very much John McKnight for coming down. You guys see these, but John, I'm giving away the indestructible flares. These are made by a local guy, Ken Duca from Palo Alto.
I love it. Thank you. I'll wear it with pride.
Yeah, there you go. Now you have to figure out how to turn it off.
I can't just bash it on the ground, I guess. I'm going to turn this off before I say something I shouldn't. Thank you very much for your time today.